What's up, everybody? It's Vinny Martin here with Realty Resolutions, here with CEO Jake Garay with episode 2 of Realty Check, really bringing to you the topic of buying versus renting, and some of the pros, some of the cons of both, and it all depends on your lifestyle and what you're looking to do with each one. So really.
Yeah, what's going on, everybody? So some of the things that we talked about, just in discussions when talking about this topic, because this is a big topic right now, buying versus renting, and a lot of people come to us and they ask, should I buy my house or should I rent? And with home ownership rates at an all-time low at about 64% or so, it's definitely something where you're seeing a larger amount of people are starting to rent rather than buy. And there's a couple of different reasons, things to consider. You got the cost of buying and renting. You've got mobility. You've got, all these different things, equity, and all of these different aspects you have to keep in mind when you're talking about this topic. So the thing that I really, wanted to talk about first was the cost of buying and the cost of renting. Okay, now if you're talking about strictly head-to-head, there's a couple of different things you have to keep in mind, and this isn't something that it's like an umbrella. You can't just say, oh, it's better to buy, or oh, it's better to rent. It really depends on the individual. Like, my situation might be different than Vinny's, or it might be different than yours. So you have to keep in mind that each and every individual is different, and therefore we're just going to kind of provide the pros and cons of each and how it would kind of relate to each situation, and let you guys decide for yourself if it's more beneficial to buy or if it's more beneficial to rent. So when it comes down to cost, guys, with interest rates at nearly an all-time low, at about 3.35 to 3.5%, depending on that, and then obviously varying off of credit scores and things like that, the access to money, while it is still more difficult to get a mortgage because of the '08 crash and everything that happened with the housing and the banking markets back then, it's definitely becoming easier to gain access to a mortgage. And so when you look at your mortgage payment every single month, right? Typically speaking, a mortgage payment is actually going to be less than the rent. Okay, and the reason being is because of the fact that there's a lot of other costs associated with buying your own house, whether it be your closing costs. So every single time you buy a house and every single time you sell a house, there's closing costs involved with that transaction. So if you're someone who's going to be moving a lot, maybe every 1 year, every 2 years, every 3, 4 years, if you're not planning on being in a house for, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, there's a reason that you have to take it into account the fact that your mortgage is typically a 30-year mortgage. Negative, it's amortizing, meaning that your first 15 years or so, you're really primarily paying the interest on that mortgage. So the banks are getting their money back first, and then you're beginning to build equity. Now, you could say, if your payment is $2,000 a month for your mortgage, any percentage that you go over that automatically goes into the equity of your house. So if you're financially stable and you have a good income or a good income to, loan value, where you can look and say, I'm making X amount of dollars and I can pay an extra $300, $400, $500 a month into my mortgage, yeah, it's beneficial to you because you're going to be gaining equity in that house quicker. But my point being with how often you're moving is if you're moving every year, it's tough to really say, hey, I'm going to buy, because every time you buy a house and every time you sell a house, you've got closing costs. So when you buy a house, you've got your attorney fees, you've got all these different fees that go, title, insurance and inspections and all these different things that you have to purchase to make sure that you're getting the house that you want. You're getting a clean house, you're getting a stable house that's not going to require a lot of work. It's buyer beware, guys, which means that you have to, when you're purchasing a house, you have to remember that the system is more set up to protect the seller because of buyer beware. So, all these different costs are associated with buying the house. Then on the flip side, if you live in the house for a year and then you go to sell, now on top of all your closing costs, which depending on where you are, it's hard to say, but typically you see it anywhere from 2 to 5% of the value of the home. You have also on top of that real estate commissions, which anywhere from 4 to 6% of the value. So if you're selling your house now, you're into it, for almost 8 to 10% of the value in just your closing costs, and then that's being deducted away from your sale price. So if you buy a house on January 1st and you pay those closing costs, and then you sell the house on January 1st the following year, you're paying this lump sum of cash that you didn't build in equity because you were paying interest on the mortgage for the entire year. So from a cost perspective, it doesn't make sense to do that if you're going to be constantly moving to buy. The second aspect that you got to keep in mind is the fact that typically it is actually cheaper to buy a house because of the fact that if you're there for a long time with interest rates, I read a statistic that said interest rates would have to go up another 10%, so to about 12% or so, in order for it to be less expensive to rent than it would be to buy. But that's over the course of a 30-year mortgage. That's if you're going to live in that house and you live in an area where home prices and home values are appreciating, and you look at the current state of the market, and yes, things are getting better, prices are going up, there's low demand, or there's high demand but low inventory, so home values are appreciating. But if you're in an area where typically, with appreciation, if you live in an area that's 2%, 3% appreciation, you're not really gaining much, because you're paying the interest on your mortgage, as well as the fact with inflation and things like that, you're not really gaining much equity. So there's all these different costs associated with buying. And then on the renting side, you've got to remember, yes, when you buy, you've got down payment. And depending on, we were talking about this before, and he asked about what typically, you're seeing lenders require as a down payment. It depends on your credit score. It depends on, if it's a, conforming mortgage, what's going on with your credit score, what your income situation is, and things like that, what the LTV is, loan to value of the home. Typically bankers, they like to go like 80% or less. So they don't want the loan to be for greater than 80%, so it would be a 20% value on the down payment. But now you're seeing a lot of banks that are starting to offer, I think it was Bank of America has a 3% down program for, I believe it was only first-time home buyers. I could be wrong on that. But still, you're seeing down payment rates starting to go back down to pre-crash. So now it's easier to get that access to a mortgage, to get the home, which is a good thing for buying a home. Now on the renting side, you've got to remember, you need renter's insurance. You've got all of your typical, costs associated with owning, whether it be, your utilities, your electric bill, your gas bill, phone, whatever it may be. And then you've got a security deposit, so it really depends on that whole entire, kind of taking a look at your current financial situation, taking a look at that. And the last thing I will say is, if you do buy, what's nice is if I spend, $1,400 a month, or let's call it $1,000, it's an easier number, $1,000 a month in rent, or $1,000 a month in mortgage, your $1,000 a month in rent at the end of that 12 months is gone forever. So you're never going to get that money back. It's in the landlord's pocket, and then whatever other expenses you paid, you're not building any equity. What's nice about buying is that entire time that you're making that payment every single month, you're building equity in your home, which could then, it's not like throwing the money away in some sense. So those are the things to consider cost-wise, dollars-wise, numbers-wise, when you're talking about, if I should buy or if I should rent. So those are all things to keep in mind. And then obviously what Vinny's going to talk about a little bit more is mobility and how that can affect your situation.
And again, about, talking about the mobility is, you really got to understand, okay, what kind of lifestyle, am I committed to? You have person A who might be, settling down, and he's looking for a career in, working for a big company, and he's living 20 minutes from the company where he looks to settle down and plant his feet at, and that's probably someone who's really looking to buy, and
because he's going to be there for a long time.
Right, because his plan is to stay there, plant his feet. Then you have person B who, maybe he's in the military, and he's moving, say, every year or 2 years. That's someone who needs to have the ability to move around. So that really, at the end of the day, it really depends on the lifestyle that you want to commit to, because again, if I go in for a 20-year mortgage, and I just put down 10-15%, and now I'm committed to financing my home, your
mobility goes down.
Your ability to move, obviously it goes down. With renting, you have maybe that 1 year lease or the 6 month lease. Maybe I would say the most you're gonna lease is for a year. You know, you'll be locked in maybe for that year, and then you always have that choice to go ahead, pick up, and move. So really, it all depends on the lifestyle, and it all depends on where do you want to go, or you know what you want to do. So
I know you were telling me about how a lot of very successful real estate investors believe. What were you saying that they should?
That I heard a couple different big real estate investors. They were talking about really what he was saying. I think the exact words were rent where you live and rent. What is it?
Own
where you rent, or
rent out.
Rent what you own, and rent where you live.
Basically saying that you
if you own something, you should be renting it. So if I go ahead,
as an investment.
Right. If I go ahead and I'm living in a house, the idea behind it is you should say I buy a house, multifamily house, where I could rent out a portion of it, multifamily house, and it's paying for itself because I have someone living in there. I have a tenant living in there who's taking care of my mortgage payment, and then you know where I live might be I could rent it. So that's really
cool. That's
the idea behind it. And a lot of people, I don't think it's that they don't want to do it or they don't think it's a good idea. They just were never brought about the idea, or maybe they're just not aware of you can do that. You know, there are homes out there that are multifamily homes that are affordable, that you can purchase and rent out. You know, multifamily homes that are nice homes.
See, that's an interesting idea because then you're gaining equity in your home, and also there's a lot of benefits to that because as an investment property, if you're defining that as an investment property and you're buying it through an LLC or whatever you're doing, then there's a lot of tax incentives behind that because you can then have depreciation, you can write off the interest on the mortgage, you get the write-offs associated with owning your own business and things like that. So that's a very interesting, and that would be someone probably who, yes, you would have to be someone who, you know, would probably think that you'd be someone to be stable and to stay there for a while. But if you think about it too, though, you don't necessarily have to be because you could move and just rent out your own home.
That paid for. You're not worrying about the expense of every month your mortgage because it's getting taken care of by your tenant.
Yeah. Now, do you think that a lot of people don't do that because, like you were saying, they don't know about it, or because that maybe they're afraid to be a landlord, they don't know how to do that?
Yeah, they might be, you know, just afraid of taking on the responsibility of a landlord and what it takes to truly take care of a property every month. It really it comes on you, and I think that's another thing about owning a home. You know, when you own opposed to rent, you know, a lot of people, if you're renting, you call up your landlord and say, hey, listen, you know, the appliances, they're not working. You know, they come in, repair. You know, something goes wrong with the plumbing. You call your landlord, they take care of it. Where if you're a homeowner, it's falling on your shoulders every single time something goes wrong. Repairs, new roof, you're dealing with, you know, the water system, the well.
The costs.
Yeah, and that's another thing too that people, they might be afraid of it. You know, they might just not want to deal with the responsibility, all that weight on their shoulders.
Right, and if you think about it too, kind of going against the grain with the common thought is a lot of people view their home that they own as an asset, which isn't true because an asset is defined as something that produces an income.
Right.
So by renting, that's actually, if you look at it that way, it's a benefit to rent because you're not buying something that could either depreciate in value or cost you money. It's less of a fixer-upper cost, and the only way a home can really be an asset is if you're providing a rental income. You know, and if you're watching this and you're like, I don't want to be a landlord, you know, it's too difficult, or I don't know how, or I can't do that. There's a lot of people out there who do it on a day-to-day basis that are just your average, everyday person. They work full-time jobs. They're not full-time real estate investors. And one of the things we're going to be getting into more on this show is really how to be a good landlord.
Yep.
you know, and how, you know, the management that goes behind it. I mean, even if you wanted to just buy a home and have a property management company take care of it, yes, you then take on the management fees, but, you know, all in all, actually, if you report a loss on your income statement, that's tax deductible as well with a real estate business. So there's a lot of different things that you can consider with buying and renting, and the different the different
Avenues
costs.
that you could go.
Now, typically, I mean, what do you think? I know for me personally, what I'm seeing more and more of is younger people, you know, millennials, people aged 20, 18, 19, 20, 22 to 35, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not seeing as many of them, like that American dream of buying and living in their own home. It's not as strong as it once was.
Yeah, and I think I see more people renting than anything, and
that's why home ownership rates are all-time low.
They're at an all-time low, and I think a lot of it is because you have people like myself or of my age that are coming out of school with all these loans and student debt. They have a mortgage in a sense before they even can purchase their own home, or, you know, take out a loan for their own home. They're backed up in student debt. Student loans to, you know, anywhere from $50,000 to over $100,000. I know people personally, and I think that's a big issue.
We're seeing that for the first time ever in the history of our country.
That's a big issue with people, you know, younger people who are trying to settle down and really trying to start their lives off. Once where people were purchasing homes with no student loan or student debts, now they're worrying about, oh my God, I have this $600-700, you know, payment that I have to pay every single month for these student loans. That's putting a damper on people go ahead and saying, okay, listen, I can now, you know, purchase my own home and take on the mortgage payment every single month.
So this is interesting that you're talking about this, because I have some statistics here for first-time home buyers. And I think, like you were saying, what you're seeing is because of that, the average age of a first-time home buyer is going up. Like, I know my dad owned and lived on his own in his first home when he was 23 years old.
Yep.
Now the average college student, after, you know, grad school and everything, you know,
they're going right back to mom and dad, or they're
to
renting
save
a
money.
place.
Exactly, because then they can save up money, which is a good thing in that sense of being smart. And I think you're seeing a tendency more to rent amongst that because of the mobility factor. People with travel so accessible nowadays, people are looking to travel more, and careers aren't as, it's more, I guess you would say, fluid. You know, people are moving around more. People are being forced to move because of work, because of being transferred.
Yep.
So, you know,
They
that's
don't
one
know
of
where they're going to settle.
Exactly. So that's a big thing. But I mean, just in terms of you know, types of homes purchased, 90% or 80% are single family homes, and then condos and apartments, which is actually, if you think about it, another great way to have a low payment. You know, I know most apartments you could, you know, and at least in our market, are renting out anywhere from, like, you know, $1,200 to $1,400, $1,500, $1,600 a month. You could buy a condo for $100,000, and your mortgage is going to be pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
You know, so if you can afford to do that, and then with home buyer incentives, you know, 3% of $100,000 is $3,000.
Right.
You know, so that's a great thing to consider as well. And these are all things for you guys to consider when you're buying a home. You know, the number of buyers in the market who are first-time buyers right now is at an all-time low. It's only 32% of people that are buying today that are first-time buyers. Right. That's an all-time low. That's a very low number. Typically, it's a higher number, because if you think about it, 20, 30 years ago, people were living in their homes for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Yep. And so what you're seeing now is people who are, you know, so then, back then I should say, is there was more people who were first-time home buyers, because you bought a home, you stayed there for 10, 20, I know the house that we've been in now, we've been in for 18, 19 years now. You know,
My
19 years.
in their house over 20 years.
Yeah, so it's crazy to think about. That's why you saw such a higher percentage of first-time buyers, but now what you're seeing is that percentage is lower. People are moving more often because of work and things like that. You know, and 64% purchased for the desire to own their own home, which is interesting to think about. So 64% of first-time buyers are buying because they have a desire to own their own home. And that number seems low to me. You know, 20, 30 years ago, 10 years ago even, before the crash, more and more people wanted to own a home. Some people own 5.
Right.
You know, so if you're watching this and you're a real estate investor, this provides a great opportunity, because as more and more people enter the rental market, the rent rates are going to go up, because, you know, it's just simple economics. Supply side, you know, and demand side economics. If there's more demand in the marketplace, a shift in the demand curve is going to lead to an increase in pricing.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to consider if you're someone considering renting. Understand where, you know, where the market is going. As more renters enter the market and there's a greater demand, as that number goes from 64 to 62 to 60 to 58 to 55%, market and rental prices are going to go up. Now, on the flip side of that too, you could say, if you own your own home, now's a great time to sell. And buy or rent temporary, whatever it may be, because demand is very, very high, but inventory is low. So there's less of a supply, which is then increasing the prices of buying a home, which is now making it so difficult. What I'm fascinated with the current state of the market is, with interest rates as low as they are, there's not as many homes being sold as you'd expect, because people just don't want to sell. Yeah. And I think some of that is a side effect of 08, that people lost a lot of equity in their homes and they can't afford to sell. They can't afford to sell at the current price, and they want to hold on to it for another 3, 4, 5 years. And so what you're seeing now is, like I said before, low inventory, high prices, which is low affordability. The harder it is to afford a home, the more people that are going to rent. Yep. It's an interesting cycle to think about and to consider when you're thinking about what's going on. So
yeah, and the more you slowly just become aware of the market and understand that there are a lot more people renting than buying, the sooner you can take advantage of that. And that's really the
from
message
the investment end of things.
That's really the message that we want to drive, you know, to those people who are interested in the investor side of things.
If you're an investor, buy and rent. Buy as many homes as you can and rent them out. Because it's funny too, the less affordable houses, from a 1-to-1 ratio, you'd think, right, if a house is $200,000, let's say if a house is $200,000 and rents for $1,500 a month, let's call it that, right? Let's call that like our ground floor number. Yeah. What's interesting is, the house that you buy for $150,000, you don't rent out for half that or 3/4 of that. You rent it out for $1,300 or $1,200. And the house you buy for $100,000, you rent out for $1,000. So what's interesting about the rental market is, as an investor, you aren't seeing the drop off in rental rates as you would expect it to correlate with the price of the home.
Right.
So that's a great opportunity if you're an investor. Now, if you're a buyer, if you're someone who's looking to buy their first home, keep in mind, with interest rates low, yes, demand is high and inventory is low, but if you can find the right home in your price point, now's a great time to lock in a very low rate. A very, very low rate. Yeah. And if you're a seller, it's a great time to sell because demand is so high and inventory is low. So these are all things to consider, kind of all-encompassing buyers, sellers, or buyer would-be renters, or people on the fence about buying and renting, people who own their homes right now who may be, you know, on the fence about selling. And obviously investors. If you're an investor, I think it's a great time in the real estate industry in general. Yes, July we saw the first decrease in number of sales year over year, but they still went up. In the general scheme of things, this year you're seeing a lot more real estate transactions than last year. The market is going in the right place. I think we are in for a minor correction over the next 6 to 12 months. But all in all, the market is trending upwards. It's getting stronger. You're seeing people, lenders are becoming more accessible, and all in all, I think everything is going in the right way. And I was looking at an article, I think it was, saying that they view real estate over the next 24 to 36 months to be a major driver of the economy in the U.S., which is a phenomenal thing for everybody who's looking to get in, because now, guys, the prices are only going to probably, there might be some minor dips and things like that, but all in all, over the next bunch of years, you're going to see a lot of upward trending in the housing market and get back to what's going on. So,
Yeah.
did you have anything else you wanted to add on
No,
that?
that's it. I mean, that concludes the video for today. Take it easy. We'll see you guys in episode 3.
Oh, question of the day.
Before we forget.
Question of the day. Looking at your current situation, what your goals are, and what you want to do over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and the information that we gave you today, is it more beneficial for you to buy or to rent, and why? Take it easy, guys.